She collapsed at a frozen crossroads with her dying baby, abandoned by a world that called her cursed. He was the millionaire cowboy who'd lost everything that mattered, riding alone through a blizzard with nothing left to lose. When their eyes met in that storm, two broken souls found something neither expected: a reason to survive. This is the story of Elena and Colton, two outcasts who defied a cruel world to build love from ashes. Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The wind screamed across the Wyoming plains like a living thing bent on murder. Elena Moore had stopped feeling her feet 3 miles back. Maybe 4. The world had become a white blur of pain and cold, and she'd lost track of time somewhere between the last town that chased her out and the endless stretch of frozen nothing that would become her grave. Her arms burned. Not from cold. She'd passed that stage hours ago, but from the weight of the bundle pressed against her chest. Lila. 8 months old. Still breathing, though each tiny breath came slower than the last. "Just a little further, baby," Elena whispered through cracked lips. Her voice barely carried over the howling wind. Just a little. Her boot caught on something buried in the snow. A rock. A frozen rut. It didn't matter. Elena's knees buckled and she went down hard, twisting her body at the last second to take the impact on her shoulder instead of crushing the baby against her chest. The snow embraced her like a lover, cold, final, almost gentle. She lay there staring up at the gray sky, snowflakes landing on her eyelashes and melting from the last remnants of warmth in her body. Her arms remained locked around Lila, but she could feel her strength draining away like water through cupped hands. This was it then. The end she'd been running from for 6 months. Elena had always imagined she'd feel more when death came. Fear, maybe. Regret? Rage at the injustice of it all. Instead, she felt only a distant sadness and a deep, bone-tired relief that the running would finally stop. Lila whimpered against her chest, and Elena's heart cracked. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she breathed. "I'm so sorry I couldn't. I tried." The words died in her throat. There were no words big enough to hold her failure. She'd promised to protect this child, and now they would both freeze in the middle of nowhere, 2 more forgotten casualties of a world that had no mercy for the powerless. Elena closed her eyes. She didn't hear the hoofbeats at first. The wind swallowed sound, twisted it, made ghosts of every noise. But then the rhythm broke through, steady, purposeful, growing closer. With tremendous effort, Elena forced her eyes open. Through the curtain of falling snow, she saw him. A rider, tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, his face hidden beneath the brim of a dark hat. His horse was massive, black as midnight, its breath steaming in the freezing air. They looked like something out of a fever dream, man and beast moving through the storm as if the cold couldn't touch them. Elena tried to speak, but her voice had abandoned her. She could only watch as the rider drew closer, then stopped about 10 feet away. For a long moment, he sat perfectly still, studying her. Elena couldn't see his face clearly, but she felt the weight of his gaze. Most men looked at a woman lying in the snow with either pity or predation. She'd learned to recognize both. This man's stare held neither. It was something else, something careful and considering, like he was working through a complicated problem in his head. "You're dying," he said finally. His voice was low, rough-edged, with the flat accent of someone born to these plains. Elena managed a weak nod. What else was there to say? "The baby?" She clutched Lila tighter, and the rider seemed to understand. He dismounted in one smooth motion, his boots crunching in the snow. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the lean, powerful build of a man who'd spent his life working with his hands. As he came closer, Elena got her first clear look at his face. He was younger than she'd expected. Maybe 35, with strong features weathered by wind and sun. Dark hair showed beneath his hat, and his eyes, gray as the winter sky, held a hollowness that Elena recognized immediately. She'd seen that same emptiness in her own reflection, the eyes of someone who'd lost everything. He crouched beside her, and Elena instinctively tried to pull away. Her body wouldn't cooperate. She managed only a slight shifting that sent pain shooting through her frozen limbs. "Easy," the man said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt you." Every survival instinct Elena had learned in 6 months of running screamed at her not to trust him. Strange men didn't stop for dying women out of kindness. They stopped for other reasons. But Lila was dying, and Elena was too weak to run, even if she'd had somewhere to run to. The man pulled off his glove and reached toward the bundle in her arms. Elena tried to speak, to protest, but he was already carefully pulling back the blanket just enough to see Lila's face. His jaw tightened. The baby's lips were turning blue. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. "Since morning." Elena's voice came out as a rasp. "Please, my baby, if you could just take her somewhere warm and leave you here to die? I'm already—" Elena's throat closed. She forced the words out. "I'm already gone. Just, please, she's innocent." The man was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes moving from Lila's face to Elena's. Then, without a word, he scooped both of them up as if they weighed nothing at all. Elena's head lolled against his chest. Through the heavy fabric of his coat, she could hear his heartbeat, steady, strong, alive. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was the rhythm of that heartbeat and the gentle rocking motion as he lifted her onto his horse. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. Warmth, blessed, impossible warmth seeping into her frozen flesh. The crackle of fire. A rough wool blanket against her skin. The soft sound of Lila crying, weak but alive. Elena's eyes flew open. She was lying on a narrow cot in what looked like a small cabin. Rough timber walls, a single window showing twilight sky, and a potbelly stove in the corner radiating heat like the sun itself. "Don't move too fast," the man's voice came from her left. "You'll make yourself sick." Elena turned her head. Even that small movement sent the room spinning, and saw him crouched by the stove, holding Lila wrapped in what looked like his own shirt. He was feeding her something from a tin cup, tilting it carefully so small sips of liquid touched her lips. "What?" Elena's voice cracked. "What are you—" "Goat's milk mixed with warm water," he said, without looking away from Lila. "Found a bit in the storage cellar. It's old, but it'll do until we can get something better." "We?" Now he did look at her, and Elena saw that hollow look again in his eyes. But something else, too. A flicker of dark humor, maybe. Or resignation. "You asked me to save her," he said. "Can't save a baby without saving her mother, too. Babies need their mothers." I never asked you to." "You're welcome." The words should have been sarcastic, but they weren't. He said them flatly, without emotion, like he was stating a simple fact. Elena tried to sit up. Her body screamed in protest, every muscle cramping, but she pushed through it until she was upright, swaying slightly. The man watched, but didn't try to stop her. "Where are we?" she managed. "Old trapper's cabin. About 8 miles from where I found you." He adjusted his hold on Lila, who'd stopped crying and was now sucking weakly at the milk. "Used to belong to a prospector named Anders. He died 5 years back. Nobody uses it anymore except me sometimes when I'm out checking the north fence line." "Fence line?" "I run cattle." He glanced at her. "Among other things." Elena's head was clearing slowly, though exhaustion still weighed on her like chains. She studied the man more carefully now. His clothes were worn but well made, good leather boots, a heavy coat that had cost real money, and though his hands were calloused from work, they were also clean. His nails were trimmed. His hair, though shaggy, had been recently cut. Not a drifter then, not an outlaw. That should have been comforting. Instead, it made her more wary. Men with money and respectability were often the most dangerous kind. "What's your name?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, like he was deciding whether to answer. "Colton Ward." The name meant nothing to Elena, but the way he said it, careful, watching for her reaction, suggested it should have. "I'm Elena Moore," she said. "And that's Lila." "I know." "You know? You've been talking in your sleep for the past 3 hours. You said both names about a dozen times." He tilted the cup again, and Lila drank a bit more. "You also said, 'Please don't,' and 'we didn't do anything' about 20 times each." Heat flooded Elena's face. Not embarrassment, but shame and anger at her own weakness. She'd learned to keep her nightmares silent, but apparently 3 hours of warmth and safety had loosened her control. "Where are you running from?" Colton asked quietly. "Everywhere." The answer came out before Elena could stop it. She pressed her lips together, but the damage was done. "And where are you running to?" "Nowhere." Elena looked down at her hands, red and chapped, the nails broken from months of survival. "There's nowhere left." Silence filled the cabin except for the pop and hiss of the fire. Lila had finished the milk and had fallen asleep in Colton's arms, her small body finally relaxed, the blue tinge gone from her lips. "Then you have me," Colton said. Elena's head snapped up. "What?" "You said there's nowhere left." He looked at her directly now, and Elena saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Not pity, not desire, something harder to name. Kinship, maybe. Recognition. "I'm offering you somewhere." "You don't even know me." "I know enough." He stood moving with surprising grace for such a large man, and carefully laid Lila in a makeshift cradle near the fire, a drawer lined with blankets. "I know you've been walking for a long time. I know people have been cruel to you. I know you'd rather die than see your baby die. That's enough." "It's not." Elena's voice came out harder than she intended. "You don't know what people say about me. You don't know what they'll say about you if they see us together." "I don't care what people say." "You will." "No." Colton moved to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. "I won't." There was certainty in his voice, but also bitterness. Elena studied his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, without turning from the window, he spoke. "I had a wife, Sarah. We'd been married 2 years when she got pregnant. She was so happy." His voice was carefully neutral, but Elena heard the pain underneath. "The pregnancy was difficult. The doctor said she was too small, that there might be complications. But Sarah wanted the baby so badly. We both did." He paused, his breath fogging the cold window glass. "When her time came, it was bad. Real bad. The doctor did what he could, but..." Colton's hands clenched into fists. "She bled too much. They both died. My wife, my son, gone in one night." "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. "The town preacher said it was God's judgment. Said I must have done something terrible to deserve such punishment. People started crossing the street when they saw me. Mothers pulled their children away, even the men I'd worked with for years." He finally turned from the window, and his face was hard as stone. "They decided I was cursed. Unlucky. A blight." Elena's throat tightened. She knew that look. She'd seen it in countless faces, felt it in countless rejections. "So when you say I don't know what people will say," Colton continued, "you're wrong. I know exactly what they'll say. I've been hearing it for 3 years. He moved back to the fire, adding another log. "The difference is, I stopped caring what they think the day they turned their backs on me." "It's not the same." "Isn't it?" "My husband..." Elena's voice caught. She forced herself to continue. "Thomas died in a mine collapse. 5 men died. I was the only wife who survived. The other widows said I must have wished him dead. The preacher said I was marked by sin. People whispered that I'd brought bad luck to the mine, that the cave-in was God's punishment for..." She couldn't finish. For what? For being barren too long, for finally having a baby when the other wives lost their men. Elena looked at Lila, sleeping peacefully in her makeshift cradle. "They blamed me for living, for having her. They said she was cursed too. Born from tragedy. They wanted us gone." "So you left." "They burned down the boarding house where I was staying. I barely got Lila out." Elena's hands shook with the memory. "That was in Laramie. We went to Rollins next. Someone recognized me, and the whispers started again. Then Medicine Bow. Then..." She shook her head. "It doesn't matter. Every town is the same. People need someone to blame for their pain, and a widow with a baby is an easy target." Colton studied her for a long moment. "How long have you been running?" 6 months? Where's your family?" "Dead. My parents died when I was 16. Thomas was all I had. Elena pulled the blanket tighter around herself. When he died, there was nothing left except debts I couldn't pay and people who wanted to punish me for surviving. The cabin fell quiet again. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows. The storm was getting worse. "You can't keep running," Colton said finally. "I know." Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "That's why I stopped." "You didn't stop. You collapsed." "Same thing." "No." Colton moved closer, and Elena fought the urge to shrink back. Stopping is a choice. Collapsing is giving up. And from what I've seen, you're not someone who gives up easy. You don't know me. I'm starting to. He crouched down so they were eye level. This close, Elena could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the weight he carried. "Here's what I know. You walked 40 miles in a blizzard with a baby in your arms. You're half starved and frozen, but when you fell, you made sure to protect her with your body. You were ready to die as long as she lived. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Elena felt tears prickling behind her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She hadn't cried in months. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford, and she wasn't about to start now. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "What do you want?" It was a fair question. In Elena's experience, nobody helped without wanting something in return. Colton sat back on his heels, considering. "Honestly, I don't know. When I saw you lying there in the snow, I could have kept riding. Should have, probably. But..." He looked at Lila, then back at Elena. "I watched my wife and child die, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. For 3 years, I've been living with that, walking around like a ghost in my own life. And today, I found you. And I had a choice. Let 2 more people die, or do something. So I did something." "That's it? You just wanted to do something?" "That's it." He stood, moving to the small table where a pack sat. He pulled out a wrapped bundle and brought it back to Elena. "Here, bread and dried meat. It's not much, but it's food." Elena took the bundle with trembling hands. The smell of the bread made her stomach cramp with hunger, but she forced herself to eat slowly, taking small bites. She'd learned the hard way that eating too fast after starving would make her sick. Colton watched her eat, then asked, "When did you last have a real meal?" 3 days ago. A woman in Elk Mountain gave us some soup." Elena swallowed another bite. "Before that, maybe a week?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't comment. Instead, he moved to check on Lila, adjusting the blanket around her tiny body. "She needs proper milk," he said, "and you need more than bread and dried meat. We'll head to my ranch at first light. It's about 15 miles south of here." Elena's guard immediately went up. "Your ranch? I've got a main house, a bunkhouse for hands, though I've only got 2 right now, and a dairy barn with fresh milk." He glanced at her. "You and the baby will have your own room, door that locks from the inside. I won't bother you. And in exchange, you work. I need help with the house, cooking, cleaning, mending. I'm not expecting charity, and I don't think you want charity either. You work, I pay you wages plus room and board. Fair trade." It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. "What about when the town finds out?" Elena asked. "What about when they come to chase me away?" "My ranch is private property. They can't chase you off without going through me first." "They'll try anyway." "Let them." There was steel in his voice now. "I've got nothing left to lose, Elena. My reputation's already dirt. Having you and Lila at the ranch won't make it any worse." Elena wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this could go wrong. But the truth was, she was out of options. She could stay and accept his help, or she could leave at dawn and die within the week. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "One condition," she said quietly. "What's that?" "If I feel like you're lying, if I think you want something from me that I can't give, I leave. No questions, no arguments. You let me go." Colton met her eyes. "Fair enough, but I've got a condition too." "What?" "You don't run without telling me why. You don't disappear in the night and leave me wondering if you're dead in a ditch somewhere." His voice roughened. "I've lost enough people. I'm not interested in adding more." The vulnerability in those words hit Elena harder than she expected. This man, This stranger who'd saved her life was asking her for something so simple. Don't make him wonder. Don't make him worry. Don't add another ghost to haunt him. She could give him that much, at least. All right, Elena said. I promise I won't leave without telling you. And I promise I won't give you a reason to leave. They stared at each other across the firelit cabin, two wounded people making promises they both hoped they could keep. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, for the first time in longer than Elena could remember, she felt something other than fear. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was close. It was possibility. It was hope. Elena woke twice in the night. The first time Lila was crying, a thin, hungry wail that cut straight through sleep. Before Elena could struggle out of bed, she heard Colton moving in the darkness, his footsteps crossing the cabin floor. I've got her, he said quietly. Go back to sleep. Elena should have protested. She'd been taking care of Lila alone for 6 months, and accepting help felt like admitting weakness. But exhaustion was a weight she couldn't lift, and the sound of Colton's low voice murmuring to the baby was oddly comforting. She fell back asleep to the sound of him mixing milk and warming it by the fire. The second time she woke, it was deeper into the night. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cabin was filled with shadows. Elena lay still, listening. Someone was breathing wrong, too fast, too harsh. She turned her head and saw Colton sitting at the small table, his head in his hands. His shoulders were rigid, his whole body tense like he was fighting something invisible. A nightmare, Elena realized, or a memory. Sometimes they were the same thing. She should have looked away, given him privacy, but something in his posture, the utter aloneness of it, made her speak. Colton? His head snapped up, and even in the dim light she could see the sheen of sweat on his face. For a moment he looked lost. Then his eyes focused on her, and he seemed to come back to himself. Sorry, he said roughly. Didn't mean to wake you. You didn't. Are you all right? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. No, but I haven't been all right for 3 years, so that's nothing new. Elena pushed herself up to sitting, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. Do you want to talk about it? What's there to talk about? Dead is dead. No amount of talking brings them back. No, but it helps with the living. Colton was quiet for a long moment, then slowly he spoke. I dream about it sometimes, about that night. In the dream I can save them. I'm faster, smarter. I find a better doctor. I convince Sarah to go to Denver where the hospitals are. 1,000 things I didn't do when it mattered. His voice cracked. But every time I wake up and they're still dead, and I'm still here. I know, Elena whispered. Do you? I dream about the mine collapse. In my dreams, I convince Thomas to stay home that day. He's sick, or there's a storm, or I'm pregnant again and I ask him not to go. And he lives. She pulled her knees to her chest. But then I wake up, and he's still dead, and people still blame me for living. They sat in the darkness, two people bound by loss and guilt and the cruel certainty that some things couldn't be changed no matter how hard you wished. Do you think... Colton started, then stopped. What? Do you think we're being punished? The way the preachers say? Elena thought about that. She'd asked herself the same question 1,000 times during the long months of running. No, she said finally. I think terrible things happen, and people need someone to blame because randomness is too frightening. It's easier to believe in punishment than to accept that sometimes life is just cruel for no reason. That's a grim philosophy. It's an honest one. Colton smiled slightly, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less haunted. You're tougher than you look, Elena Moore. I've had to be. Yeah. He stood, moving to add more wood to the fire. Orange light flared, pushing back the shadows. We both have. As the fire crackled back to life, Elena felt something shift between them. Not attraction, though Colton was handsome in a rough-hewn way, but understanding. They'd both walked through fire and come out scarred. They both knew what it was to be judged, condemned, and cast aside. In a strange way, that made them safer with each other than they would be with anyone else. They had no illusions, no pretenses, just two damaged souls trying to survive. "Get some sleep," Colton said, settling back at the table. "We've got a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." "What about you?" "I'll sleep when I'm tired." Elena knew better than to push. Some kinds of exhaustion couldn't be cured by sleep. She lay back down, pulling the blanket up to her chin, and watched the firelight dance across the ceiling. In the cradle, Lila slept peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. For the first time in 6 months, Elena let herself think about the future. Not just the next hour or the next town, but actual future. A place to stay. Work to do. Wages to earn. Maybe eventually, a life. It was a fragile hope, easily broken. But it was hope nonetheless. And for now, that was enough. Dawn came cold and clear, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Elena woke to find Colton already moving around the cabin, packing supplies and preparing the horse. "There's hot water in the pot," he said without looking at her. "And more bread. Eat something before we leave." Elena did as instructed, her body still weak but recovering. Lila woke soon after, hungry and fussing, and Elena fed her carefully, rationing the goat's milk. "We'll get better milk at the ranch," Colton said, watching them. "My dairy cow just calved last month. Fresh milk, all you need." 20 minutes later, they were ready to leave. Colton lifted Elena onto the horse with surprising gentleness, then handed Lila up to her before mounting behind them. His arms came around them both, holding the reins, creating a protective circle. "Lean back," he instructed. "It's a long ride, and you're still weak." Elena wanted to argue that she could manage, but her body disagreed. She let herself lean against his solid warmth, Lila tucked safely between them. As they rode out into the bright winter morning, Elena looked back once at the little cabin that had saved their lives. Then she turned forward toward whatever came next. Behind her, Colton Ward sat straight in the saddle, his gray eyes fixed on the horizon, his expression unreadable. Two broken people, one horse, and a baby riding toward an uncertain future. But for the first time in a long time, Elena thought maybe, just maybe, uncertain was better than hopeless. The ranch was waiting, and with it, a chance at something neither of them had dared to dream of. A home. The ranch appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley where the land dipped away from the wind. Even from a distance, Elena could see it was substantial. A 2-story main house with a wraparound porch, a large barn painted red against the snow, several outbuildings, and miles of fence stretching in every direction. This wasn't just a ranch. It was an empire. "You said you run cattle," Elena said quietly, her voice carrying over the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. "Among other things," Colton replied, the same answer he'd given before. 300 head of cattle, 50 horses, dairy operation, and some sheep. Used to be twice that before." He didn't finish, but Elena understood. Before his wife died. Before the town turned on him. Before he became a ghost living in his own life. As they drew closer, Elena noticed how well-maintained everything was, despite the isolation. The fences were straight and strong, the buildings freshly painted, the paths cleared of snow. This was the work of someone who still cared, even if he claimed not to. 2 men emerged from the barn as they rode into the yard. One was older, maybe 60, with a weathered face and bow legs that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. The other was younger, barely 20, with nervous eyes that darted between Colton and Elena. "Boss," the older man said, nodding. His gaze lingered on Elena and Lila, questions forming behind his careful expression, but he asked none of them. "Wondered when you'd be back. Storm was a bad one." It was. Colton dismounted, then reached up to help Elena down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and his hand shot out to steady her. "Elena, this is Frank Hayes, my foreman, and that's Billy Crane, one of my hands. Frank, Billy, this is Elena Moore and her daughter Lila. They'll be staying here." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. Frank's face remained neutral, but Elena saw the calculation in his eyes. Billy looked downright terrified, like Elena might be carrying plague. "Ma'am?" Frank said finally, tipping his hat. Billy mumbled something similar, but took a step backward. "Elena will be helping with the house," Colton continued, his voice carrying an edge of warning. She'll need the upstairs bedroom, the one with the fireplace. Make sure it's heated before nightfall. Boss, that's... Billy started, then stopped when Frank elbowed him sharply. That's Mrs. Ward's old room, Frank said carefully. You sure about this? The air went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Elena felt Colton's body tense beside her, saw his jaw clench. I'm sure, he said flatly. Get the room ready. Frank studied his boss for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, come on, Billy, we've got work to do. As the two men headed toward the house, Elena heard Billy's whispered protest. But Frank, you know what people will say? What people say isn't our business, Frank's voice carried back. Boss's decisions are his own. We work here, we don't judge. You got that? Their voices faded as they entered the house. Elena stood in the yard holding Lila, feeling the weight of what she'd walked into. She'd known there would be complications, but standing here in the dead woman's home, about to sleep in the dead woman's room, made everything suddenly, violently real. You don't have to give me her room, Elena said quietly. It's the warmest room in the house. Lila needs warmth. Colton's voice was controlled, but Elena heard the pain underneath. Sarah would have wanted someone to use it. She hated waste. Colton, it's been empty for 3 years. It's just a room. He turned toward the house, effectively ending the conversation. Come on, you need food and rest. Elena followed him up the porch steps, each one feeling like crossing a threshold she couldn't return from. The front door opened into a large parlor that had once been beautiful and could be again. Good furniture sat beneath layers of dust. Expensive rugs covered the floor, their colors muted by neglect. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold and dark. This was a house that had stopped living. Colton led her through the parlor to a kitchen that was cleaner than the rest, clearly the only room he actually used. A large table sat in the center, scarred from years of use. Pots hung from hooks on the wall. A pump sink stood beneath a window overlooking the barn. Sit, Colton instructed, pointing to a chair. I'll get milk for the baby. Elena sat, grateful to be off her feet. Lila had woken and was looking around with wide eyes, taking in the new surroundings. Elena held her close, breathing in her baby smell, trying to quiet the anxiety clawing at her chest. What was she doing here? She didn't belong in this house, in this dead woman's space. She was an intruder, a ghost replacing a ghost. Colton returned with a bottle of fresh milk, still warm from the cow. He handed it to Elena, who tested it on her wrist before offering it to Lila. The baby latched on hungrily, and Elena felt a rush of relief. Real milk, fresh and clean and plentiful. Thank you, she whispered. Colton nodded and moved to the stove, where he began pulling out supplies. Within minutes, the smell of bacon filled the kitchen, followed by eggs and bread toasting on the iron surface. Elena watched him work, surprised by his competence. Most men she knew couldn't boil water without supervision. You cook, she observed. I eat. He flipped the bacon with practiced ease. Learning to cook was easier than starving. What about Frank and Billy? Don't they eat here? They take meals in the bunkhouse mostly. Prefer it that way. He slid eggs onto a plate, added bacon and bread, and set it in front of Elena. Eat. All of it. Elena stared at the food, more than she'd seen in weeks, and felt her throat tighten. This is too much. You're half starved. Your body needs fuel. He poured coffee into a mug, black and strong. Drink this too. You'll need your strength if you're going to be working. The mention of work steadied Elena. This wasn't charity. This was employment. She picked up the fork and began to eat, forcing herself to go slowly despite her body's demand to devour everything immediately. Colton sat across from her with his own plate, eating in silence. The only sounds were the clink of silverware and Lila's contented nursing. It should have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. They'd moved past small talk in that cabin. There was no need for pretense now. Tell me about the work, Elena said between bites. What exactly do you need? Everything. Colton gestured at the dusty parlor visible through the doorway. The house has been neglected. I keep the kitchen functional and my bedroom clean, but the rest... He shrugged. I couldn't bring myself to touch Sarah's things. Frank offered once, but I told him no, so everything just sits. collecting dust and memories. And you want me to clean it? I want you to make it livable again. Not the same. It can't be the same, but something. A house instead of a mausoleum. His gray eyes met hers. If you can't do that, if it's too much, tell me now. Elena thought about it. She'd be touching another woman's possessions, reorganizing another woman's home, sleeping in another woman's bed. It should have felt wrong, but she'd spent 6 months in other people's spaces, temporary and unwelcoming. She'd learned to adapt, to make herself small and unobtrusive. Maybe here she could do the opposite. Maybe she could expand, fill the empty spaces, make them hers. Not replacing, rebuilding. I can do it, she said, but I'll need to know what you want kept and what can be changed. Relief flickered across Colton's face. Keep anything that matters. Change anything that doesn't. I trust your judgment. You don't know me well enough to trust my judgment. I know you walked 40 miles in a blizzard to save your daughter. I know you're sitting here eating breakfast instead of asking for handouts. I know you're already planning how to earn your keep. He leaned back in his chair. That's enough. Before Elena could respond, the back door opened and Frank stepped in, stomping snow from his boots. Room's ready, boss. Got a good fire going. Found clean linens in the cedar chest. Made up the bed. Should be warm enough by now. His eyes flicked to Elena. Anything else you need, ma'am? No, thank you, Elena said. I appreciate your help. Frank nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Ma'am, I don't know your story, and it's not my place to ask, but I've worked for Colton Ward for 8 years, and he's a good man. Fair and honest. Whatever brought you here, you could have done worse. Frank, Colton said, a warning in his voice. Just saying. Frank tipped his hat and left, the door closing softly behind him. Elena looked at Colton, who'd gone slightly pink around the ears. He's protective of you. He's a meddling old fool. He cares about you. Same thing. But there was affection beneath the gruffness. Colton stood, gathering the empty plates. Come on, I'll show you the room. Elena followed him up a narrow staircase to the second floor. 3 doors lined the hallway. Colton opened the one at the far end, and warm air spilled out. The room was beautiful. Large windows faced south, flooding the space with winter light. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, covered with a quilt in shades of blue and cream. A rocking chair sat near the fireplace, which blazed cheerfully. A dresser, a wardrobe, a small table, everything a person could need, and everywhere traces of the woman who'd lived here last. A hairbrush on the dresser, books on the bedside table, a shawl draped over the rocking chair. Photographs in silver frames showing a young woman with kind eyes and a bright smile, standing beside a younger, happier version of Colton. Elena's chest tightened. Colton, I can't. The room down the hall is smaller and colder, he said quietly, and Lila needs warmth. This is the right choice. But her things are just things. He moved to the dresser and began opening drawers, pulling out clothing, dresses, undergarments, nightgowns. These should fit you, more or less. Sarah was about your size. Take what you need. Elena stared at the pile of clothing, beautifully made from good fabric, clothes that had been loved and worn and touched by another woman's hands. I can't wear a dead woman's clothes. Would you rather wear rags? Colton's voice was sharper than necessary. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was gentler. Elena, I'm not trying to replace Sarah. I'm trying to help you. These clothes are just sitting here, serving no purpose. She would have wanted someone to use them. Please. The please broke something in Elena's resistance. She nodded slowly. All right. Thank you. Colton moved toward the door, then stopped, his hand on the frame. Without turning around, he said, Sarah was kind. She would have liked you, I think. She would have helped you, if she could. So don't feel guilty about being here. She'd be glad someone finally made this room warm again. He left before Elena could respond, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Elena stood in the center of the room, holding Lila, surrounded by another woman's life. She felt like an imposter, a placeholder, a temporary fix for permanent loss. But Lila was warm, fed, safe, and that had to be enough. Elena laid Lila in the center of the big bed, surrounded by pillows so she couldn't roll off, and moved to the dresser. She examined the clothes Colton had pulled out. A simple wool dress in dark green, practical underthings, warm stockings. They were beautiful and well made, the kind of clothes Elena hadn't worn since before Thomas died. She changed quickly, her fingers clumsy on the buttons. The dress fit well enough, a little loose in the shoulders but otherwise acceptable. She caught her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser and barely recognized herself. Clean, clothed in something other than rags. Almost respectable. A knock sounded on the door. "Elena? You all right in there?" "Yes," she called back. "Come in." Colton entered carrying a basin of warm water and clean towels. "Thought you might want to wash." He set them on the table, carefully not looking at her. "There's soap in the dish." "Thank you." Elena paused. "Colton, about the clothes?" "They look good on you," he said simply. Then, as if embarrassed by the comment, he added, "I mean, they fit. That's good. Practical." He was already backing toward the door. "I've got work to do in the barn. Rest if you need to. Frank will bring up more firewood before supper." He left quickly, and Elena found herself smiling despite everything. For all his rough edges, Colton Ward was uncomfortable with intimacy, with closeness, with anything that suggested care. He could save a dying woman and her baby without hesitation, but offering a compliment made him flee like a spooked horse. Elena washed her face and hands in the warm water, the simple act of being clean bringing tears to her eyes. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be anything other than filthy and exhausted. Lila began to fuss, and Elena picked her up, settling into the rocking chair. As she rocked, feeding the baby again, she looked around the room with new eyes. Yes, it had been Sarah's room, but Sarah was gone. And Elena was here, alive, with a daughter who needed her to survive. She couldn't change the past, hers or Colton's or Sarah's. But she could choose how to move forward. She could honor the woman who'd lived here by living well herself, by taking care of this house and this man who'd saved her life, by building something good from the ruins of what had been. It wasn't replacement, it was renewal. And maybe, just maybe, that was what both she and Colton needed. The afternoon passed in a haze of exhaustion and recovery. Elena dozed in the rocking chair, Lila sleeping in her arms, while the fire crackled and snow began to fall again outside the window. When she woke, the light had shifted, and she could hear voices from outside, Colton and Frank discussing repairs to the barn roof. Elena laid Lila on the bed and went to the window. Below, she could see Colton gesturing at something, Frank nodding. Billy was leading horses from the barn to the paddock, his movements efficient despite his youth. This was a working ranch, well run despite the owner's grief. Whatever else Colton Ward was, he wasn't a man who shirked responsibility. A knock came at the door, quieter this time. "Ma'am, it's Frank. Got firewood for you." "Come in." Frank entered with an armload of split logs, which he stacked neatly beside the fireplace. He was careful to keep his eyes down, respectful of her privacy. "Thank you," Elena said. "Yes, ma'am." He straightened, hat in hand. "Boss wanted me to tell you supper will be at 6. He'll bring it up if you're not feeling strong enough to come down." "I can come down." Elena didn't want to be coddled, didn't want to become another burden. "I should start earning my keep." Frank's weathered face creased in what might have been approval. "Boss said you'd say that. He also said to tell you there's no rush. You've been through hell, and you need rest more than we need help right away." Did he really say hell? His exact word, ma'am. Frank's eyes twinkled briefly. He doesn't sugarcoat much. I've noticed. Elena glanced at Lila, still sleeping peacefully. "Frank, can I ask you something?" "Yes, ma'am." "What kind of man is Colton Ward, really?" Frank considered the question carefully. "He's the kind of man who pays fair wages and never cheats. The kind who'll work alongside his hands instead of just giving orders. The kind who saved my life once when I got thrown from a horse and busted my leg 3 miles from anywhere." He paused. "He's also the kind of man who's been dying slowly for 3 years, and nobody could figure out how to help him. Until today." "I'm not here to save him," Elena said quietly. "Didn't say you were." Frank moved toward the door. "But sometimes two broken people can hold each other up when neither can stand alone. That's not saving, that's surviving." He left Elena with those words hanging in the air. She returned to the window, watching Colton work below. His movements were economical, practiced, purposeful. A man who knew exactly what he was doing and did it well. She thought about Frank's words. Two broken people holding each other up. It wasn't a romantic notion. It was practical. Necessary. A partnership of convenience born from mutual need. She could live with that. At 6 o'clock, Elena made her way downstairs with Lila in her arms. The house was warmer now, the kitchen bright with lamplight. Colton was at the stove again, and the smell of stew filled the air. "Beef stew," he said without turning. "And biscuits, nothing fancy." "It smells wonderful." Elena settled into a chair, adjusting Lila on her lap. "Can I help with anything?" "You can eat and rest. Tomorrow you can help." He ladled stew into bowls, set them on the table along with a plate of golden biscuits. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Tired, but better." "Good." He sat across from her and they began to eat. After a few minutes of silence, Colton said, "Frank told me you asked about me." Elena felt heat creep up her neck. "I didn't mean to pry." "It's not prying. You're living here. You have a right to know who you're living with." He broke open a biscuit, steam rising. "What did he tell you?" "That you're fair, honest, that you work hard." Elena hesitated. "That you've been dying slowly for 3 years." Colton's hand stilled. "Frank talks too much." "Does he? Or does he just see clearly?" "Both." Colton met her eyes. "He's not wrong, though. After Sarah died, I went through the motions. Ran the ranch because it needed running. Ate because I had to. Slept when exhaustion forced me. But I wasn't living. I was just existing. And now? Now I have something to do besides feed cattle and fix fences." He gestured at Lila. "Now I have a reason to make sure the house is warm and the food is decent. It's not much, but it's more than I've had." "I'm not your purpose, Colton. Neither is Lila." "I know, but maybe you're a beginning." He stood, clearing the dishes. "Maybe that's enough." They finished the meal in companionable silence. Afterward, Elena insisted on washing the dishes while Colton prepared bottles of milk for Lila's nighttime feedings. They moved around each other in the kitchen like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours, an easy rhythm developing between them. "Tomorrow," Colton said as Elena dried the last plate, "I'll show you the rest of the house. You can decide where to start with the cleaning. Take your time. Do what you can. I'm not expecting miracles." "What are you expecting?" He thought about it. "Honestly, just for you to be here. Just for the house to feel less empty." He looked embarrassed. "That probably sounds pathetic." "No," Elena said softly. "It sounds lonely." "Same thing, isn't it?" "Not quite. Lonely means you wish it was different. Pathetic means you've given up on it ever changing." She set down the towel. "You haven't given up, Colton. If you had, you would have ridden past me yesterday." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "You're right. I haven't given up." He smiled slightly. "I'm not sure when I decided that, but I did." "Good." Elena picked up Lila, who was starting to fuss. "Then neither of us has given up, and that means we have a chance." "A chance at what?" "I don't know yet, but something better than what we had." Colton nodded slowly. "Something better than what we had. I'll take those odds." As Elena carried Lila upstairs, she heard Colton banking the fire, locking the doors, settling the house for the night. The sounds were domestic, normal, comforting. The sounds of a home where people lived instead of just existed. In Sarah's room, no, in her room now, Elena laid Lila in the bed and changed into the borrowed nightgown. She climbed under the covers, the mattress soft beneath her, the fire warm on her face. For 6 months she'd slept in barns, under bridges, in abandoned shacks, always cold, always afraid, always ready to run. But tonight, in this house with this broken man downstairs, she felt something she'd almost forgotten. Safety. It was fragile. It could shatter. But for tonight, it was real. And as Elena drifted toward sleep, Lila warm beside her and the fire crackling softly, she let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd found more than shelter. Maybe they'd found a home. 3 weeks passed like a careful dance between two people learning each other's rhythms. Elena rose before dawn each morning, fed Lila, then came downstairs to find Colton already in the kitchen making coffee. They'd share breakfast in quiet companionship before he headed out to work the ranch, and she began the enormous task of bringing the house back to life. She started with the parlor, carefully packing away Sarah's most personal items, photographs, letters, a music box that played a tinny waltz, and storing them in the attic where Colton could decide their fate when he was ready. The rest she cleaned with methodical precision, washing windows until they sparkled, beating rugs until no more dust emerged, polishing furniture until it gleamed. The house began to breathe again. Colton would come in for lunch, his boots stomping on the porch, and stop in the doorway of whatever room Elena was working in. He never said much, but she'd catch him looking around with something like wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe his home was becoming a home again. "You don't have to work this hard," he told her one afternoon, finding her on her hands and knees, scrubbing the kitchen floor. "Yes, I do." Elena sat back on her heels, pushing hair from her face. "You're paying me wages. I intend to earn them." "I'd pay you just for being here." "I know. That's why I work this hard." She dipped the brush back in the bucket. "I don't want charity, Colton. I want to be useful." He'd left without another word, but that evening she found a new mop leaning against the kitchen door and a bar of gentler soap that wouldn't crack her hands. The nights were harder. After supper, after the dishes were done, and Lila was asleep, Elena would sit in the parlor with mending or knitting while Colton read the newspaper or worked on ranch accounts. Sometimes they'd talk, small things, safe things, the weather, the cattle, Billy's improving horsemanship, Frank's bad knee. But sometimes the silence would stretch too long, and Elena would look up to find Colton staring at nothing, his face hollow with old grief. She'd learned not to ask if he was all right. Instead, she'd simply say his name, and he'd come back to himself, offering a tight smile that never reached his eyes. They were healing, both of them. But healing was slow, painful work. On the 23rd day, Billy came galloping into the yard just after breakfast, his horse lathered and his face white with fear. "Boss!" he shouted, tumbling from the saddle. "Boss, they're coming!" Colton came out of the barn at a run, Elena right behind him. "Who's coming?" "Men from town, 5 of them, maybe 6. I was checking the south fence and saw them on the road." Billy was gasping for breath. "They're headed this way, and they don't look friendly." Elena's blood turned to ice. She'd known this moment would come. She'd just hoped for more time. Colton's face went hard as stone. "Frank, get out here!" The foreman emerged from the tack room, took one look at Billy, and swore under his breath. "Trouble?" "Riders from town." Colton's voice was clipped. "Billy, get the horses into the far pasture. Frank, you're with me. We'll meet them at the gate." "Colton," Elena started. "Go inside, take Lila upstairs, stay there until I come for you." "I won't hide." "Elena," his eyes met hers, and she saw fear there. Not for himself, but for her. "Please, just this once, let me handle this." She wanted to argue, to stand beside him, to face whatever was coming, but Lila was upstairs, vulnerable and innocent, and Elena's first duty was to her daughter. "All right," she whispered, "but Colton, be careful." He nodded once, then turned to face the road where dust was already rising from approaching riders. Elena ran inside, up the stairs, to the bedroom where Lila lay napping in a shaft of winter sunlight. She scooped up her daughter, held her close, and moved to the window where she could see the front gate. 5 men on horseback rode into the yard like they owned it. Elena recognized the type immediately. Prosperous, respectable, the kind of men who made decisions about other people's lives over brandy and cigars. The leader was tall and heavy-set, with steel gray hair and a thick mustache. He wore a banker's suit under his heavy coat. Beside him rode a thin man in black, a preacher judging by his collar. The other 3 were younger, harder-looking men who sat their horses with the easy confidence of those accustomed to getting their way. Colton stood at the gate, Frank at his shoulder. Even from a distance, Elena could see the tension in Colton's body, the way his hands hung loose at his sides, ready. "Ward," the banker called out, not bothering to dismount. "We need to talk." Then talk, Morrison. But do it from there. You're not welcome on my property." Morrison's face reddened. "Now see here." "You see here." Colton's voice carried clearly in the cold air. 3 years ago, when my wife died, you and your friends decided I was cursed. You stopped doing business with me. You crossed the street to avoid me. You made damn sure I knew I wasn't welcome in your town. So forgive me if I'm not inclined to roll out the welcome mat now. We're not here to discuss the past, the preacher said, his voice oily with false concern. We're here about your present situation, about the woman you're harboring. Elena's arms tightened around Lila. I'm not harboring anyone, Colton said. Elena Moore is my employee. She works for wages, same as Frank and Billy. What business is that of yours? She's a widow with a questionable reputation, Morrison said. She's been run out of 3 towns that we know of. Everywhere she goes, she brings trouble and bad luck. We can't have that kind of influence near our community. Your community is 15 miles away. That's close enough for her taint to spread. The preacher leaned forward in his saddle. Mr. Ward, we understand you've been lonely. We understand you might be susceptible to a woman's manipulation. But for your own good, and for the good of this valley, she needs to go. Colton laughed, but there was no humor in it. For my own good? That's rich, coming from men who abandoned me when I needed help. Where were you when Sarah died? Where were you when I was drowning in grief and couldn't see a way forward? You were busy protecting yourselves from my bad luck. Now you want to tell me what's good for me? We're trying to protect you from making a terrible mistake, Morrison said. This woman has a name. Use it. Fine. Elena Moore is dangerous. She's a curse, Ward. Her husband died and she lived. The other widows lost everything. People have suffered wherever she's gone. And now she's here, with you. And we won't stand by and watch another tragedy unfold. Frank spoke up, his voice rough with anger. The only tragedy I see is 5 grown men riding out here to bully a woman and a baby. You ought to be ashamed. Stay out of this, Hayes, one of the younger men said. This doesn't concern you. The hell it doesn't. I work here. Anything that concerns this ranch concerns me. Morrison's horse shifted, sensing its rider's agitation. Ward, we're not here to argue. We're here to tell you how it's going to be. That woman leaves today, or there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? Colton's voice went dangerously quiet. The bank holds the note on your south section. That note comes due in 6 months. I could make it due immediately if I wanted. You'd call in a loan over this? I'd call in a loan to protect this community from a curse. Morrison's face was hard. We've already lost too much to tragedy and bad luck. We won't risk more. Elena pressed her forehead against the cool glass, bile rising in her throat. It was happening again. Always the same script, the same accusations, the same ending. She should have known better than to hope for something different. Below, Colton stood perfectly still. When he spoke, his voice carried across the yard like a whip crack. No. Morrison blinked. What? I said no. Elena stays. Call in the loan if you want. I'll pay it off. I've got the money. Do you? Because I heard your herd losses were significant last winter. I heard you've been struggling to keep this place running. You heard wrong. Colton's voice was steel. I can pay what I owe, and you know it. This isn't about money or loans. This is about you being terrified of something you don't understand, so you're trying to destroy it. The preacher spoke again, his voice taking on a sanctimonious tone. Mr. Ward, I've known you since you were a boy. Your father was a good man, a godly man. What would he think of you taking in a woman of questionable virtue? A woman who may be carrying the devil's mark? My father would think I'm doing what's right. He'd be proud that I'm not turning away someone in need. Colton took a step forward. And if you ever insult Elena or question her virtue again, preacher, you and I are going to have a very different kind of conversation. Are you threatening a man of God? I'm threatening a man who's using God as an excuse for cruelty. There's a difference. Morrison held up a hand, trying to regain control. Ward, let's be reasonable. We're not asking you to throw her out in the cold. We're simply saying she can't stay here. Give her some money, send her on her way to the next town. Let her be someone else's problem. She's not a problem. She's a woman who needed help, and I gave it. End of story. It's not the end, one of the younger men said. It's just the beginning. When bad things start happening, and they will, remember we warned you. The only bad thing happening is this conversation. Frank moved to stand beside Colton. I think you gentlemen should leave now. We're not done. Yes, Colton said flatly. You are. Get off my land. Morrison's face went purple with rage. You're making a mistake, Ward, a big one. Don't come crying to us when everything falls apart. I wouldn't come to you if I was dying of thirst and you had the only water in Wyoming. Colton pointed toward the road. Leave. Now. And don't come back unless you're invited. For a long moment, Elena thought Morrison might refuse. The tension stretched tight as a wire, ready to snap. Then the banker yanked his horse's head around and spurred it toward the road, the other 4 men following. But the preacher paused at the gate, turning back one last time. God have mercy on your soul, Colton Ward. You're choosing damnation. If loving my neighbor and showing mercy is damnation, Colton called after him, then I guess I'll see you in hell, preacher. The riders disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust and snow. For a long moment, Colton and Frank stood at the gate, watching them go. Then Colton's shoulders sagged, and he braced his hands on the fence post like his legs might give out. Frank said something Elena couldn't hear, clapped Colton on the shoulder, and headed back to the barn. Billy emerged from wherever he'd been hiding, his young face troubled. Colton stood alone at the gate for several more minutes, staring down the empty road. Then, slowly, he turned and walked back toward the house. Elena met him at the door, Lila still in her arms. His face was pale, his eyes haunted. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I should have left before they came. I should have—" "Don't." His voice was rough. "Don't apologize for other people's fear and stupidity. But the loan, if he calls it in, I'll pay it. I meant what I said. I have the money." He moved past her into the kitchen, poured himself water from the pump with shaking hands. "I should have expected this. I knew word would get around. I just thought—" He laughed bitterly. "I don't know what I thought." Elena set Lila in the cradle Colton had brought down from the attic last week and moved to stand beside him. "You thought they'd leave you alone. You thought you'd paid enough dues with 3 years of isolation that they'd let you have this one thing." "Yeah." He drank the water in one long swallow. "Stupid." "Not stupid. Human." Elena touched his arm gently. "Colton, I can leave. I can pack up right now and be gone by nightfall. I won't have you losing your ranch because of me." His hand came up, covering hers where it rested on his arm. His skin was cold, but his grip was firm. "No." "But no, Elena. You're not leaving. Not because of them." He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not just determination, but defiance. Anger. And underneath it all, fear. "When Sarah died, I let them make me feel ashamed. I let them isolate me, punish me, treat me like I was cursed. I accepted it because part of me believed it. I believed I deserved to suffer. You didn't. I know that now. And I know that what they're doing to you is the same thing they did to me. They're scared of something they can't control. Death, tragedy, bad luck, so they find someone to blame. Someone vulnerable. Someone who can't fight back." His jaw clenched. "Well, I'm not letting it happen again. Not to you. Not on my watch. Colton, I'm not your responsibility. Maybe not, but you're my choice. And I choose to have you here, regardless of what they think." He released her hand, but his eyes held hers. "Unless you want to leave. If you do, I'll understand. I'll give you money, a horse, supplies, whatever you need. But don't leave because of them. Leave because you want to." Elena looked at this man who'd saved her life, who'd given her shelter and work and dignity when no one else would. This broken man who was standing up to his entire community for a woman he'd known less than a month. "I don't want to leave," she said softly, "but I'm afraid of what it will cost you." "Let me worry about that." "Colton, Elena." He said her name like a prayer and a plea. "For 3 years, I've been half dead. Going through motions, surviving but not living, and then I found you in that storm, and for the first time since Sarah died, I had a reason to fight, to care, to be angry at injustice instead of just accepting it." He drew a shaky breath. "Maybe that makes me selfish. Maybe I'm keeping you here for my own sake as much as yours. But I don't care. I'm not letting them take this away from me. I'm not letting them win." The raw honesty in his voice broke something loose in Elena's chest. This wasn't about nobility or heroism. This was about survival and stubbornness, and 2 damaged people refusing to let a cruel world crush them. All right, she said. I'll stay. But we do this together. No more hiding upstairs while you face them alone. If they come back, I stand with you. Elena. Together, Colton. Or not at all. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Together. They stood in the kitchen as afternoon light slanted through the windows, and Elena felt the nature of their arrangement shift. It wasn't just employment anymore. It wasn't just convenience. It was partnership, alliance, two people choosing to face the world side by side. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like the first solid ground she'd stood on in months. The sound of a rider approaching made them both tense. Colton moved to the window, relaxing slightly when he saw who it was. Frank's wife, he said. Martha, from the neighboring ranch. Elena watched as an older woman dismounted from a sturdy mare and marched up to the door with the determination of someone on a mission. She knocked sharply, and Colton opened it. Martha, he said cautiously, what brings you out here? Common sense, which seems to be in short supply today. Martha Hayes pushed past him into the kitchen, her sharp eyes finding Elena immediately. You must be Elena Moore. I'm Martha Hayes, Frank's wife, and I'm here to tell you that not everyone in this valley is a superstitious fool. Elena blinked, caught off guard. Ma'am? I heard what happened. Frank rode over to tell me, worried sick about what those idiots from town might do next. Martha pulled off her gloves with sharp, angry movements. I wanted you to know that some of us remember what it means to be Christian. Real Christian, not the kind that preacher spouts on Sundays while judging everyone around him. Martha, Colton started. Don't you Martha me, Colton Ward. I'm old enough to say what I think, and what I think is that those men ought to be ashamed of themselves. She turned back to Elena. I lost my first husband to a fever 20 years ago. People whispered about me too, said I must have done something to anger God, said I was unlucky. It's easier to blame a widow than admit that life is random and cruel sometimes. I appreciate that, Elena said quietly. But I don't want to cause trouble. You're not causing trouble. They are. Martha's voice softened slightly. My dear, trouble will come whether you're here or not. The question is whether you have people standing with you when it does. And I'm here to tell you that you do. You don't even know me. I know enough. Frank says you work hard, you're good with that baby, and you've brought life back to this house. That's enough for me. Martha glanced at Colton. And I know this man here has been dying by inches for 3 years, and suddenly he's fighting again. That's worth something. Colton's ears went pink. Martha, I'm fine. You're better than fine. You're alive again. Don't think I haven't noticed. She moved to the cradle where Lila was starting to wake, her face softening. Oh, look at this precious girl. May I? Elena nodded, and Martha lifted Lila with the practiced ease of someone who'd raised children. The baby looked up at her, curious but not afraid. She's beautiful, Martha said. How old? 8 months. A good age. Still small enough to hold, but starting to see the world. Martha rocked Lila gently. I have 4 grandchildren of my own, all grown now. I miss having babies around. Elena felt tears prick her eyes at the simple kindness of this stranger. After months of rejection and cruelty, Martha's acceptance felt like water in the desert. Thank you, she whispered. You don't know what this means. I know exactly what it means. Martha returned Lila to her mother. And I'm not the only one who feels this way. There are good people in this valley, Elena. People who remember what matters. We may not be as loud as the fools, but we're here. Morrison threatened to call in my loan, Colton said. He's serious about making trouble. Let him try. My second husband, Frank's brother, God rest him, was a banker himself before he died. I know how these things work. Morrison can't call in a loan without cause, and you being kind to a widow isn't cause. Martha's eyes glinted. Besides, if he tries, I'll make sure everyone knows he's using his position to bully people. That won't sit well with his other customers. Martha, I don't want you getting involved in this, Colton said. It could backfire. I'm already involved. The moment those men decided to ride out here and threaten you, they made it everyone's business. She pulled her gloves back on. Now I'm going back to my ranch to start making some visits. There are women in this valley who've been whispering about you, Colton. pitying you and gossiping about your isolation. Well, now they're going to hear the truth that you've done a Christian thing by helping someone in need, and if they have a problem with that, they can answer to me. She headed for the door, then paused. Elena, I'll be back in a few days with some supplies, things a woman and baby need. Don't argue, she added when Elena started to protest. It's not charity. It's neighborliness. And around here, we take care of our own. But I'm not. You are now. Martha's smile was fierce and warm. Welcome to the valley, my dear. It's not perfect, but it's home. She left in a swirl of skirts and determination, leaving Elena and Colton staring after her in stunned silence. Well, Colton said finally. That happened. Elena laughed, a shaky sound half relief and half disbelief. She's terrifying. She's the best friend you could have in a fight. Colton moved to the window, watching Martha ride away. Frank married into a hell of a family. Do you think she can help? Really? If anyone can, it's Martha. She's got more influence in this valley than Morrison realizes. People respect her. He turned back to Elena. But she's right about one thing. This isn't over. Morrison's too proud to back down now. He'll find other ways to make trouble. Then we'll deal with it together. Elena met his eyes. Like we said. Colton nodded, but Elena could see the fear still lingering in his expression. Not fear of Morrison or the town. Fear of something else, something deeper. What is it? She asked gently. I keep waiting for it all to fall apart, he admitted. For you to realize this is a mistake. For something terrible to happen that proves them right about curses and bad luck. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. Colton, when Sarah died, I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. Like someone had reached in and ripped out everything that mattered. And I swore I'd never let myself care about anything again because caring that much, losing that much. His voice cracked. I can't do it again, Elena. I can't survive it again. Elena understood what he wasn't saying. He was afraid. Afraid of caring about her and Lila. Afraid of building something only to watch it crumble. Afraid that opening his heart again would lead to nothing but more pain. She crossed the kitchen and took his hands in hers. They were rough, calloused, strong, hands that had built and worked and survived. I can't promise you that nothing bad will happen, she said softly. I can't promise we'll be safe forever, or that this will work out perfectly. Bad things happen to good people all the time. We both know that better than most. Then what? But I can promise you this. I won't leave unless you ask me to. I won't abandon you. I won't make you face the world alone. She squeezed his hands. You saved my life, Colton. You gave me and Lila a chance when no one else would. Let me return the favor. Let me stand with you. Let me help you remember what it feels like to be part of something instead of always being alone. Colton stared at their joined hands, and Elena saw the war playing across his face. Fear and hope, despair and possibility, the terrible weight of past loss battling against the fragile promise of a different future. I don't know if I remember how, he whispered. Then we'll learn together, both of us, one day at a time. He looked up at her then, and Elena saw tears in his eyes. This strong, stubborn man who'd faced down 5 riders without flinching was crying in his kitchen over the simple offer of companionship. I'm scared, he admitted. Me too. What if they're right? What if I am cursed? Then we're both cursed, and we'll be cursed together. Elena managed a small smile. Misery loves company, right? That startled a laugh out of him, rough and surprised. You're crazy. Probably, but so are you, for taking in a stranger from a snowstorm. Her smile widened. Looks like we're both crazy. That makes us perfect for each other. Perfect, Colton repeated, like he was testing the word. I wouldn't go that far. Then how about good enough? Can we be good enough for each other? He was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. Then, slowly he nodded. Yeah, we can be good enough. It wasn't a declaration of love, it wasn't a promise of forever, but it was real and honest and true. 2 broken people agreeing to shore up each other's wounds, 2 outcasts choosing alliance over isolation. It was enough. Colton pulled his hands free gently and wiped his eyes, embarrassed. Sorry, I don't usually... Don't apologize for being human. I keep forgetting how to be human. You keep reminding me. Good. Someone has to. Elena moved back to the stove, suddenly needing to do something with her hands. Now, are you going to help me with supper, or are you going to stand there looking broody all evening? I don't look broody. You absolutely do. Frank told me. He says it's your signature look. Frank talks too damn much. Elena laughed, and the sound filled the kitchen with warmth. Colton shook his head, but he was smiling as he rolled up his sleeves and moved to help her. They cooked together as the winter sun set beyond the windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Lila babbled in her cradle. The fire crackled. The house felt alive in a way it hadn't in years, and in that moment, neither Elena nor Colton thought about curses or town gossip or threats from bankers. They thought only about the warmth of the kitchen, the smell of food cooking, and the simple companionship of working side by side. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles. But tonight, they were home. And that was everything. The trouble came back 4 days later, but not in the way Elena expected. She was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard the commotion outside, raised voices, the sound of horses, and beneath it all, an undercurrent of menace that made her blood run cold. Through the window, she saw not 5 riders this time, but a dozen, maybe more. They filled the yard like an occupying army, their faces hard and their intentions clear. At the center stood Reverend Michaels and Morrison, but they'd brought reinforcements. Elena recognized some of them from her brief passage through the nearby town. The blacksmith, the general store owner, several ranch hands who worked for the big spreads. Men who had families and reputations to protect. Men who'd been convinced that a cursed widow was a threat to everything they held dear. Elena's hands trembled as she wiped them on her apron. This was worse than before. This wasn't a warning, this was an ultimatum. She scooped Lila from her cradle and held her close, then moved to the door. Colton had told her to stay inside if trouble came again, but she couldn't hide. This was about her. She wouldn't let him face it alone. The moment she stepped onto the porch, the crowd's attention swung to her like a weapon. She felt their eyes, angry, afraid, judgmental, and forced herself to stand tall despite the trembling in her legs. Colton stood between the crowd and the house, Frank at his left shoulder, Billy at his right. All 3 men looked ready for violence, their bodies tense, their faces grim. I told you before, Morrison, Colton was saying, his voice tight with controlled fury. Get off my property. And I told you there would be consequences if you didn't see reason. Morrison sat his horse with the confidence of a man backed by numbers. We gave you a chance to do the right thing. You refused, so now we're here to do it for you. You're here to do nothing but leave. Colton's hand hovered near his hip, and Elena noticed for the first time that he was wearing a gun. This is private property. You're trespassing. We're protecting our community, Reverend Michaels intoned. That woman has brought nothing but misfortune since she arrived. Already your cattle have been showing signs of illness. Already there's been talk of bad luck spreading through the valley. Elena's stomach dropped. What illness? What are you talking about? Don't play innocent, one of the ranch hands called out. 3 of Morrison's heifers died just yesterday. Perfectly healthy one day, dead the next. That's your doing. That's not... I haven't done anything. Cattle die, Frank said sharply. It happens. Doesn't mean there's a curse. It means something when it happens right after she shows up, the blacksmith said. He was a huge man, arms like tree trunks, and his presence alone was intimidating. We've all heard the stories from the other towns. Mine collapses, house fires, illness. Everywhere she goes, tragedy follows. That's not true, Elena said, but her voice came out weak. How could she defend herself against accusations of bad luck? How could she prove she wasn't cursed? Isn't it? Morrison's eyes were cold. Your own husband died in a mine collapse. 5 men dead, but you lived. The other widows lost everything, but you had a baby. How do you explain that? I don't have to explain survival to you. Maybe not, but you do have to leave. Morrison gestured to the men around him. We're not here to hurt anyone. We're just here to escort you off this property and out of this valley. Pack your things. You have 1 hour. No. Colton's voice cracked like a whip. She's not going anywhere. Ward, don't be a fool. We outnumber you 12-3. We don't want violence, but we'll use it if we have to. Then you'll have to. Colton's hand dropped to his gun. Because Elena stays. The yard went deadly quiet. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could feel Lila's small body pressed against her chest, could see the terrible moment hanging in the balance. Men were going to die here. Maybe Colton, maybe Frank or Billy, maybe even her. All because people were afraid of something they didn't understand. Colton, don't! Elena's voice cut through the tension. She walked down the porch steps, past Colton, until she stood facing the crowd directly. Don't fight them. I'll go. Elena. Colton reached for her arm, but she pulled away gently. It's not worth dying for. She looked at Morrison, at the Reverend, at all the hard faces staring at her with fear and hatred. You want me gone? Fine. I'll leave. But you need to know that you're not protecting anyone. You're just being cruel. Cruelty is sometimes necessary, Reverend Michaels said, for the greater good. There's nothing good about this. Elena's voice shook with anger and grief. You're terrorizing a woman and a baby because you're afraid. Because it's easier to blame someone than to accept that bad things happen randomly. I haven't cursed anyone. I haven't done anything except try to survive. But if hating me makes you feel safer, then fine. Hate me. Just let me go in peace. She turned to go back to the house, to pack the few possessions she owned, to gather Lila's things and walk away from the only safe place she'd known in months. Her vision blurred with tears, but she wouldn't let them fall. She wouldn't give these people the satisfaction. Colton caught her arm, spinning her back around. His face was white with fury, and something else, something that looked like panic. No, he said. No, you're not doing this. You're not leaving. I have to... You don't have to do anything except stay right here. He looked past her to the crowd and his voice rose. You want her gone? You'll have to go through me. And I promise you, Morrison, if you try, some of you won't make it home to your families tonight. Don't be stupid, Ward, the blacksmith said. We don't want to hurt you. Then leave, right now. Get off my property and don't come back. We can't do that. Then we have a problem. The tension ratcheted higher. Hands moved toward weapons. Horses shifted nervously. Elena could feel violence building like a storm about to break. And then, miraculously, a new voice cut through the chaos. What in God's name is going on here? Everyone turned to see Martha Hayes riding into the yard, and she wasn't alone. Behind her came 6 more riders, older women and men, respectable looking, their faces set with determination. Elena recognized one of them as the doctor who'd passed through town weeks ago, and another as the widow who ran the boarding house in the nearest settlement. Martha dismounted and marched straight into the center of the confrontation, her small frame radiating outrage. I asked a question. Someone better answer me. Mrs. Hayes, this doesn't concern you, Morrison said, but his voice had lost some of its authority. Like hell it doesn't. When a dozen men ride onto a neighbor's property to terrorize a woman and child, it concerns every decent person in this valley. Martha planted herself between Elena and the crowd. Now, I'm going to give you all one chance to turn around and ride home before I lose my temper. Martha, you don't understand, Reverend Michaels began. This woman is dangerous. The only dangerous thing I see here is mob mentality and rank stupidity. Martha's eyes blazed. You should be ashamed of yourselves, every single one of you. My cattle died, Morrison protested. 3 healthy heifers dead overnight. That's not natural. Did you have the veterinarian look at them? The doctor asked, riding forward. Because I did, Morrison. You asked me to. Remember? Morrison's face reddened. What does that have to do with... I examined those animals this morning. They died of poisoning. Specifically, they got into a patch of water hemlock growing by your North Creek. There's a whole stand of it there, and your fence was down. The cattle got through and ate it. A murmur ran through the crowd. Morrison sputtered, but that doesn't... It means your cattle died because you weren't maintaining your fences properly, the doctor said bluntly. Not because of any curse, just plain old negligence. The certainty in the crowd began to crack. Men looked at each other, doubt creeping into their expressions. What about the other towns? Someone called out. What about the mine collapse and the fires? Elena found her voice. The mine collapsed because the company cut corners on safety to save money. Everyone knew the supports were bad. They just didn't care until it was too late. And the fires? She laughed bitterly. People set those fires deliberately to drive me out. There was no curse, just cruelty. She's lying, Reverend Michaels insisted, but he sounded less certain now. Is she? Martha turned to face the crowd. Or have we been so eager to find someone to blame for our troubles that we stopped thinking clearly? Life is hard out here. Cattle die. Accidents happen. People get sick. That's not a curse. That's just life. But the widow's curse is real, the blacksmith said. My grandmother told me stories. Stories, Martha interrupted. That's all they are. Stories we tell ourselves to make sense of random tragedy. But Elena Moore isn't responsible for your grandmother's stories any more than she's responsible for Morrison's poor fencing. The widow from the boarding house rode forward, her face kind. I knew Elena when she passed through my town. She stayed 3 days, worked hard to pay for her room, and caused no trouble. The only reason she left was because people like you scared her away with your superstition and hatred. We're trying to protect our families, one of the younger men said, but his voice wavered. By terrorizing a mother and infant? The widow shook her head. What kind of protection is that? What kind of people does that make us? Silence fell over the yard. Elena could see the moment the mob's certainty began to crumble. These weren't evil men. They were scared men, and fear had driven them to the edge of violence. But now, faced with reason and witnesses who contradicted their narrative, the fear was losing its grip. Morrison tried one last time. Even if the cattle weren't her fault, having her here is still inappropriate. Ward is a single man. She's a single woman. It's not proper. Then he should marry her. The words came from Colton, and they hit Elena like a physical blow. She spun to face him, her mouth open in shock. What? Colton's eyes were locked on hers, intense and determined. Marry me. Colton, you can't. This isn't. I'm serious. He moved closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. I was going to wait. I was going to give us more time. But they're not going to stop, Elena. As long as there's any excuse to come after you, they will. But if you're my wife, if this is legally your home, they can't touch you. You don't want to marry me. You barely know me. I know enough. His hand found hers, warm and solid. I know you're brave and stubborn and kind. I know you make this house feel like a home. I know that losing you, even after just a few weeks, would hurt worse than anything I've felt in 3 years. His voice cracked. I know I don't want to watch you walk away. But marriage doesn't have to mean what you think it means. We don't have to. He colored slightly. We can keep separate rooms. This can be a partnership, a legal arrangement, whatever you need it to be. But please, Elena, say yes. Let me protect you the only way I know how. Elena's mind reeled. This was insane. They'd known each other less than a month. Marriage was permanent, binding, complicated. She'd loved Thomas, truly loved him, and his death had nearly destroyed her. Could she risk that kind of connection again? Could she bind herself to this broken man and his broken life? But looking at Colton's face, at the hope and fear and desperate determination there, Elena realized something. She was already bound to him, already connected, already caring more than was safe or sensible. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Are you sure? She whispered. I've never been more sure of anything. We barely know each other. Then we'll learn. We've got time. What if this is a mistake? Then we'll make it together. He squeezed her hand. Say yes, Elena. Please. She looked at Lila in her arms, at this tiny person who depended on her for everything. Then at Colton, who was offering something she'd thought was impossible. Safety, protection, a place to belong. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was real and honest and true. Yes, she said softly. I'll marry you. The relief that flooded Colton's face was almost painful to see. He pulled her close, careful not to crush Lila between them, and pressed his forehead against hers. Thank you, he breathed. Thank you. Martha's voice rang out, breaking the moment. Well, you all heard him. They're getting married. Does that satisfy your sense of propriety, Morrison? The banker looked like he'd swallowed something sour. This is highly irregular, but legal, the doctor pointed out. And proper. She'll be Mrs. Ward, living on her husband's property, unless you have some other objection. Morrison opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. When is this marriage supposed to take place? Now, Colton said, turning to face the crowd while keeping Elena tucked against his side. Right now. Reverend, you're already here. You might as well perform the ceremony. Reverend Michaels looked apoplectic. I will not. This is a farce. You can't possibly. I can, actually. The doctor pulled a small book from his saddlebag. I'm licensed to perform marriages in this territory, have been for 10 years. If the Reverend won't do his job, I'll be happy to step in. This is madness, someone muttered, but the fight had gone out of the crowd. They were spectators now, not a mob. Colton looked down at Elena. Are you ready? No, but I don't think I ever will be, so we might as well do it now. He laughed, and it was a real laugh, full of relief and disbelief, and something that might have been joy. All right then, let's get married. The next 15 minutes passed in a blur. Martha produced a ring, her own wedding band, and pressed it into Colton's hand with a fierce hug. Frank and Billy stood as witnesses, both looking stunned but supportive. The boarding house widow held Lila, cooing at her while Elena's hands were occupied. The doctor opened his book and began to read. The words washed over Elena: love, honor, cherish, sickness, health, death. All the traditional promises people made when they still believed in forever. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. She wanted to cry at the strange mercy of finding safety in the most unlikely place. When the doctor asked if she would take Colton as her husband, Elena looked into his gray eyes and saw her own fear and hope reflected back. Two broken people making impossible promises. Two outcasts choosing each other against all reason. I will, she said. When Colton said the same, his voice was steady and sure. He slid Martha's ring onto Elena's finger. It was slightly too large, but it would do, and then, because the ceremony demanded it, he kissed her. It was brief, chaste, awkward. Their first kiss, witnessed by a crowd of people who'd come to drive her away and were now watching her marry instead. Elena felt heat flood her face, but Colton's hand was solid and warm in hers, anchoring her. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the doctor said, closing his book with a satisfied snap. What God has joined, let no man put asunder. Martha started clapping, and slowly, reluctantly, others joined in. Not everyone, Morrison and his closest allies, sat their horses in stony silence, but enough that the applause felt genuine. The boarding house widow returned Lila to Elena with tears in her eyes. Congratulations, Mrs. Ward, she whispered. Mrs. Ward. Elena had been Mrs. Moore for 3 years, and that name had died with Thomas. She'd never expected to be anyone's wife again. And now, in the space of 15 minutes, she'd become Elena Ward, married to a man she barely knew, bound to a life she couldn't predict. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like hope. Morrison finally found his voice. This doesn't change anything, Ward. She's still my wife, Colton interrupted. Legally, properly, in front of witnesses. Which means she has every right to be here. And if you or anyone else tries to harm her or drive her away, you'll be committing a crime against a married woman on her own property. His voice hardened. I don't think even you want to explain that to the territorial marshal. Morrison's jaw worked, but he had no answer. He'd been outmaneuvered, and he knew it. This isn't over, he said finally. Mark my words, Ward. This won't end well. It already ended well. Colton pulled Elena closer. I got exactly what I wanted. If you can't be happy for us, at least have the decency to leave us alone. Morrison yanked his horse's head around and spurred toward the road. Most of the men followed, though a few lingered to offer awkward congratulations before departing. Within minutes, the yard was clear except for Martha, the doctor, the widow, and the few others who'd come to help. Martha embraced Elena tightly. Welcome to the family, dear. Not the way I expected this to happen, but I'll take it. Thank you, Elena whispered, for everything. If you hadn't come. Hush. Of course I came. That's what neighbors do. Martha pulled back, her eyes fierce. Now, You need a proper wedding supper. I'll go home and cook something special. Bring it back tonight. We'll celebrate properly. You don't have to. I want to. Let an old woman fuss, will you? The others made their farewells, promising to spread the word that Elena was now Mrs. Ward and under Colton's protection. The doctor advised them to file the marriage certificate with the territorial office as soon as possible, just to make everything official and legal. And then, finally, they were alone. Frank and Billy had tactfully disappeared to the barn. Elena and Colton stood in the yard, married but still strangers in so many ways, uncertain what came next. So, Colton said finally. That happened. Elena laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. That happened. Are you all right? I don't know. Are you? I don't know either. He ran a hand through his hair. I'm sorry. I should have asked you properly, not just blurted it out in front of everyone. You deserve better than that. You gave me what I needed when I needed it. That's better than a pretty proposal. Elena looked down at the ring on her finger. Colton, we should talk about what this means, about expectations, and later, he took her hand gently. Right now you're shaking, and Lila needs to eat, and I think we both need to sit down before we fall down. We'll figure out the rest as we go. He was right. Elena's legs felt like water, and her mind was spinning. Too much had happened too fast. She needed time to process, to understand what she'd just done. Colton led her back to the house, his hand warm and steady on her back. Inside, everything looked the same, the kitchen, the parlor, the stairs leading up to the bedrooms. But everything had changed. This was her home now. Really, truly hers. Not a temporary shelter or a place she was just passing through, but a home. She was Elena Ward. She had a husband. She had a house. She had protection and safety and a future. The weight of it, the reality, crashed over her like a wave, and suddenly Elena was crying. Not sad tears or scared tears, but overwhelmed tears, months of held-back emotion finally breaking free. Hey, Colton said, alarmed. Hey, Elena, it's okay. I know, she sobbed. I know it's okay. That's why I'm crying. He pulled her against his chest, careful of Lila between them, and just held her while she wept. His hand stroked her hair gently, and he murmured wordless comfort, and Elena felt something inside her that had been clenched tight for so long finally begin to relax. She was safe. She was home. She was married to a good man who'd chosen her even when the world told him not to. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. It wasn't the fairy tale she'd dreamed of as a girl, but it was real and solid and hers. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, that was enough. When the tears finally subsided, Elena pulled back, embarrassed. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall apart on you. You're allowed to fall apart. You just survived a mob and got married in the same afternoon. That's a lot. You survived it too. Yeah, but I'm used to people hating me. You're not. He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. You did good today, Elena, standing up to them like that. I was proud of you. The simple words made her throat tight again. I was terrified. Brave isn't the absence of fear. It's being scared and doing it anyway. He smiled slightly. You're the bravest person I know. I'm not. You are. His expression grew serious. Elena, I meant what I said. This marriage can be whatever you need it to be. We don't have to. I'm not expecting. He colored. Your room is yours. I won't intrude. This is a partnership first. Anything else? If there's ever anything else, that's your choice. Always. Elena understood what he was offering. Safety without obligation. Protection without demands. He was giving her control over her own life in a way few husbands ever did. Thank you, she said softly. That means more than you know. I know what it's like to have people take your choices away. I won't do that to you. They stood in the kitchen, this newly married couple, looking at each other with careful hope. They'd saved each other today. Elena from exile, Colton from isolation. They'd chosen partnership over loneliness, courage over fear. It wasn't love, but it was something real and true and worth fighting for. So, Elena said, trying for lightness, what do married people do for the rest of the day? Colton laughed. I have absolutely no idea. I was married before, but I don't remember the wedding day being this dramatic. Maybe we could just be normal, whatever that means. Normal sounds good. He moved toward the stove. How about I make tea, you feed Lila, and we pretend this is just another Wednesday afternoon? Except we're married now. Except that, he agreed, but otherwise completely normal. Elena settled into a chair, adjusted Lila for feeding, and watched as her husband, moved around the kitchen with easy competence. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything gold. Somewhere outside, Frank and Billy were working. Soon Martha would return with her celebratory meal. Life was continuing, moving forward, refusing to be stopped by fear or superstition. And Elena Ward, formerly Elena Moore, formerly a cursed widow with nowhere to go, sat in her own kitchen and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. Not perfect, not easy, but all right. And for two people who'd survived what they had, all right was a miracle worth celebrating. The weeks following the wedding passed in a rhythm that was both strange and comforting. Elena woke each morning in her room upstairs, dressed in clothes that had belonged to another woman, and came down to find Colton already making coffee. They'd share breakfast in companionable silence, and then he'd head out to work the ranch while she tended the house and cared for Lila. It was domestic and ordinary, and nothing like either of them had expected. But beneath the surface of normalcy, tension simmered. They were married, but not really married. They shared a house, but not a life. They were polite and careful with each other, like two people walking on ice that might crack at any moment. Elena felt it most acutely in the evenings, when they'd sit together in the parlor after supper. Colton would read or work on accounts while Elena mended clothes or played with Lila. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the room, and Elena would see questions there. Questions about what they were to each other, about whether this arrangement could ever become something more. But neither of them asked the questions aloud. It felt safer not to. Martha came to visit often, bringing food and gossip and practical advice. The boarding house widow stopped by twice with baby clothes that her grandchildren had outgrown. Even the doctor made a social call, checking on Lila and pronouncing her thriving. Word had spread through the valley that Elena Ward was under protection now, legally wed and therefore untouchable. Most people accepted it. Some even warmed to her, curious about the woman who'd captured Colton Ward's attention after years of self-imposed isolation. But Morrison and his allies remained hostile. They didn't come to the ranch again, but Elena heard stories, whispered accusations in town, veiled threats, rumors designed to undermine and isolate. The cattle deaths had been explained away by poisonous plants, but new incidents were attributed to Elena's presence. A barn fire at a neighboring ranch, a child's illness that lasted weeks, bad weather that delayed spring planting. Every misfortune, no matter how ordinary, somehow became evidence of the curse. "They'll never stop, will they?" Elena asked one night, sitting by the fire with Lila asleep in her arms. "They'll always find something to blame me for." Colton looked up from the book he wasn't really reading. "Probably not. Some people need someone to hate. It makes them feel better about their own problems. I'm tired of being hated." "I know." He set the book aside. "But you're not alone anymore. That has to count for something." "It does." Elena looked at him across the fire-lit room. "Colton, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you regret it? Marrying me?" The question had been building for weeks. Elena needed to know if he saw her as a burden, a mistake, a choice made in the heat of the moment that he now wished he could take back. Colton was quiet for so long that Elena's heart began to sink. Then he stood and crossed the room, settling into the chair beside hers. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I regret nothing," he said. "Marrying you was the first real decision I've made in 3 years. The first time I chose something instead of just letting life happen to me." He reached out and gently touched Lila's sleeping face. "You and this little one, you gave me a reason to fight, to care, to remember what it feels like to be human instead of just a ghost walking around in my own life. But it's complicated. Everything worth having is complicated." His gray eyes met hers. "Elena, I'm not good at this, at talking about feelings or making pretty speeches, but I need you to know that having you here, it matters. You matter. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. You matter too. Then we matter to each other. And that's enough to build on, isn't it? Before Elena could answer, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Both of them tensed. Visitors after dark were rarely good news. Colton moved to the door, his hand automatically going to the gun he now wore whenever he left the house. Who's there? It's Frank, boss. We've got trouble. Colton opened the door to find his foreman standing in the cold night air, his face grim. What kind of trouble? The north pasture fence is down. Cut deliberately from the looks of it. Half the herd scattered, and Billy's out trying to round them up before they wander onto Morrison's land. Frank's jaw clenched. This wasn't an accident, boss. Someone did this on purpose. Elena's stomach dropped. This was it. The retaliation they'd been expecting. Morrison couldn't drive her away directly, so he'd attack the ranch instead. How bad? Colton asked, already reaching for his coat. Bad enough. We'll lose animals if we don't get them back before dawn, and if they cross onto Morrison's property. He'll claim they're trespassing and keep them. Colton turned to Elena. I have to go. Lock the doors behind me. Don't open them for anyone except me, Frank, or Billy. Colton, wait. Elena stood, still holding Lila. What if it's a trap? What if someone's waiting out there? Then I'll deal with it. He cupped her face briefly, his hand warm against her skin. I'll be careful. I promise. He was gone before she could protest further, disappearing into the night with Frank. Elena locked the door with shaking hands and moved back to the parlor, where she could see out the window toward the pastures. Lantern lights bobbed in the darkness as men on horseback fanned out across the property. She could hear distant shouts, the lowing of confused cattle, the sound of hooves on frozen ground. This was her fault. The fence had been cut because of her. Morrison was hurting Colton to hurt her, and there was nothing she could do about it. Elena paced the parlor with Lila, her mind racing. She could leave. Pack a bag right now, walk away before dawn, disappear and let Colton claim she'd abandoned him. The marriage could be annulled. He could go back to his quiet, isolated life without the target she'd painted on his back. But even as she thought it, Elena knew she wouldn't do it. She'd promised not to run. She'd promised to stand with him. And she'd meant it. Hours crawled past. Elena dozed in the chair, jolting awake at every sound, her body tense with worry. Lila slept peacefully, unaware of the turmoil outside. Finally, as gray light began to creep across the horizon, she heard horses returning. Elena rushed to the window and saw Colton and Frank riding in, both exhausted and covered in dirt. Billy followed behind, leading several head of cattle back toward the barn. Elena threw open the door and ran out into the cold morning air. Are you all right? Is anyone hurt? We're fine, Colton said, dismounting stiffly. Got most of the herd back. Lost maybe 5 head, but that's better than it could have been. Did you see who did it? No, they were long gone by the time we got there. He handed his horse to Billy with a word of thanks, then turned to Elena. His face was haggard, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. But we found something else. What? Tracks leading toward Morrison's property. 2 horses, maybe 3. And this... He pulled something from his pocket, a piece of cloth, torn and dirty. Caught on the fence wire. Looks like it came from a coat. Frank stepped forward. I recognize that fabric. It's from Morrison's store. Sold it myself last month to one of his ranch hands. Elena's heart pounded. So we have proof? We have evidence, Colton corrected. Not quite the same thing, but it's enough to take to the sheriff. The sheriff won't do anything, Elena said bitterly. He's friends with Morrison. Maybe, but we have to try. Colton touched her shoulder gently. Come inside. You're freezing. They gathered in the kitchen, where Elena made coffee while the men warmed themselves by the stove. Dawn light filled the room, painting everything in shades of gold and gray. Lila woke and fussed, and Elena fed her while listening to Colton and Frank discuss their options. We could fix the fence and say nothing, Frank suggested. Let it go. And then what? Wait for them to do something worse next time? Colton shook his head. No, this ends now. I'm riding into town this morning to talk to Sheriff Dawson. I'm coming with you, Elena said. Elena, I'm coming. This is about me. I should be there. Colton looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Elena's expression stopped him. All right, but we do this carefully. No accusations we can't back up. No giving Morrison an excuse to claim we're the ones causing trouble. 2 hours later, Elena found herself sitting in the sheriff's small office in town, Lila on her lap, while Colton laid out what had happened. Sheriff Dawson listened with an expression that gave nothing away. A man practiced at staying neutral in a valley full of feuds and grudges. That's a serious accusation, he said when Colton finished. You're saying Morrison's men deliberately cut your fence? I'm saying someone did, and we found evidence pointing toward his property. Evidence isn't proof. It's enough for you to ask questions. Dawson sighed and leaned back in his chair. Ward, I'm going to level with you. Morrison's a powerful man in this town. He's got friends, influence, money. You think I can just march over there and accuse him of sabotage based on a torn piece of cloth? I think you can do your job, Colton said flatly. My job is keeping the peace. And right now, the best way to do that is to let this go. So that's it? Someone attacks my property and you do nothing? I'm saying pick your battles. Dawson's eyes flicked to Elena. Look, I understand why you married her. I even respect it. But you had to know there'd be consequences. Morrison and his friends, they're not going to let this go quietly. So they're allowed to commit crimes as long as they're self-righteous about it? That's not what I said. It's what you meant. Colton stood, his chair scraping back. Come on, Elena. We're wasting our time here. But as they turned to leave, the door opened and Martha Hayes walked in, followed by the boarding house widow and 3 other women Elena recognized from the valley. They filled the small office with their presence, their faces set with determination. Sheriff, Martha said crisply, I understand Colton and Elena have reported a crime. Dawson looked wary. Mrs. Hayes, this isn't really a matter for women. Don't be ridiculous. Everything in this valley is a matter for everyone who lives here. Martha planted herself in front of his desk. Now, what are you going to do about this fence cutting? Mrs. Hayes, I've already explained to Mr. Ward that without clear proof, then get clear proof. Investigate. Ask questions. Do your job. Martha's voice could have cut glass. Or do we need to ride out to the territorial marshal and explain that you're refusing to enforce the law when it's inconvenient? The other women murmured agreement. Dawson's face reddened. That's not fair. Fair is a woman and child being terrorized because people are afraid of things they don't understand. Fair is Colton Ward trying to do the decent thing and being punished for it. Martha leaned forward. Now, I'm going to tell you something, Sheriff. If you don't investigate this crime properly, every woman in this valley is going to hear about it. And we'll make sure everyone knows that the law only protects those with money and influence. Is that the reputation you want? Dawson looked at the assembled women, then at Colton and Elena, then down at his desk. Elena could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Political capital versus doing what was right. Finally, he sighed. All right. I'll ride out to Morrison's place this afternoon, ask some questions, but I'm not making any promises. That's all we ask, Martha said sweetly. Just do your job, Sheriff. The rest will take care of itself. They left the office in a group, and once outside, Elena turned to Martha with tears in her eyes. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just know that you're not alone. Martha squeezed her hand. We women have to stick together out here. God knows the men won't always do right by us. I heard that, Colton said mildly, but he was smiling. The boarding house widow stepped forward. Elena, dear, I wanted you to know that several of us have been talking. We're organizing a quilting circle, meeting once a week. We'd love to have you join us. Really? Elena was stunned. You want me to be part of your circle? Of course. You're one of us now, a rancher's wife, a member of this community. Why wouldn't we want you? Because of what people say about me. The curse is nonsense, one of the other women said firmly. My sister died in childbirth 5 years ago. Does that mean I'm cursed? Of course not. It means life is hard and sometimes people die. That's not your fault any more than it's mine. Elena felt something break open inside her chest. A tight, painful knot she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. These women were offering her something she'd thought was lost forever. Acceptance. Community. friendship. "I'd love to join," she managed. "Thank you." They made plans for the first meeting, chattering about patterns and fabric while Colton stood slightly apart, his expression bemused. When the women finally dispersed, he and Elena walked back to where they'd left the wagon. "That was unexpected," he said. "Martha's terrifying when she wants to be." "She is, but she's also the best ally you could have." Colton helped Elena and Lila into the wagon, then climbed up beside them. "Things might actually get better, Elena. For the first time, I believe that." The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in thought. The morning's events had shifted something fundamental. They weren't just two isolated people anymore. They had support. They had friends willing to fight for them. It made the impossible seem suddenly possible. That afternoon, Sheriff Dawson did indeed ride out to Morrison's ranch. Elena and Colton heard about it later from Frank, who'd heard it from a hand who worked for Morrison's neighbor. The sheriff had questioned Morrison's men, examined coats and boots, and found that one of the ranch hands, a young hothead named Jake Saunders, had torn his coat on something recently and couldn't explain where he'd been the night the fence was cut. It wasn't a confession, but it was damning enough that Dawson had taken Saunders into custody for further questioning. Morrison had blustered and threatened, but with the sheriff actually doing his job for once, there wasn't much he could do. "Saunders will talk," Frank predicted that evening over supper. "He's young and scared. Give Dawson a day or two, and he'll get the whole story." "And then what?" Elena asked. "Even if Saunders confesses, Morrison will just claim he acted alone. He'll never admit to ordering it." "Maybe not," Colton said, "but it'll make him think twice about trying again, and that's something." He was right. In the days that followed, Jake Saunders did confess, admitted that Morrison had paid him $50 to cut the fence and scatter Colton's cattle. The banker swore he'd done no such thing, that Saunders was lying to save himself, but the damage was done. Word spread through the valley like wildfire. Morrison, the pillar of the community, had paid someone to commit sabotage. The same man who'd ridden out to Colton's ranch, spouting righteousness and morality, had been willing to break the law to punish someone he didn't like. Public opinion shifted. Not everyone. Some still believed Morrison was innocent, or at least justified, but enough people that the banker's reputation took a serious hit. His wife stopped attending church socials. His daughters faced awkward questions. His business at the bank slowed as people took their money elsewhere. Morrison had tried to destroy Elena and ended up damaging himself instead. "Karma," Martha said with satisfaction when she came to visit. "I knew it would catch up with him eventually." But Elena took no pleasure in Morrison's downfall. She'd seen too much suffering to enjoy anyone else's pain, even someone who'd caused her so much trouble. "I just want it to be over," she told Colton one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I want to stop waiting for the next attack. I want to just live." "Then live," Colton said simply. "We've done what we can. The rest is up to them. Either they'll accept us or they won't. But we're not going to stop living our lives because of what they might do." He was right, and Elena knew it. They couldn't spend forever braced for disaster. At some point, they had to choose to believe in the possibility of peace. Spring came slowly to Wyoming that year, creeping across the valley in increments, patches of bare ground appearing through snow, the first brave shoots of grass pushing up through frozen earth, ice breaking on the creek in musical crashes that sounded like freedom. Elena worked in the garden Colton helped her plant, her hands in the earth, Lila playing nearby on a blanket. The physical labor was satisfying in a way that housework never quite was. She was creating something, coaxing life from cold ground, building toward a future harvest. Colton would come find her there sometimes, drawn by the sound of Lila's laughter, or maybe just by the need to be near. He'd crouch beside the garden and ask questions about what she was planting, and Elena would explain about beans and squash and the tomatoes that probably wouldn't survive Wyoming's short summer but were worth trying anyway. "My mother had a garden," he said one afternoon, his voice distant with memory. "She could grow anything. She used to say that putting your hands in the soil kept you connected to what mattered. She sounds wise." She was. Colton plucked a weed absently. "She would have liked you. She would have been glad I wasn't alone anymore." It was the most personal thing he'd said about his family, and Elena felt the gift of it. "Tell me about her." So he did, sitting in the dirt beside her garden while Lila gurgled and grabbed at grass. And for the first time since Elena had known him, Colton talked about his past without pain shadowing every word. He talked about his mother's laugh and his father's quiet strength. He talked about growing up on this land, learning to ride and rope and read the weather. He talked about Sarah, too, not as a ghost, but as a real person he'd loved and lost. And Elena listened, giving him the space to remember without judgment or awkwardness. When he finished, she told him about her own childhood, about Thomas, about the girl she'd been before life taught her that happiness was fragile. They sat in the spring sunshine, two people finally learning to trust each other with the truth. That night, something shifted between them. Elena felt it as clearly as she'd felt the warming of the weather. Colton looked at her differently across the dinner table, not with careful politeness, but with something deeper. Interest. Affection. Maybe even the beginning of love. After supper, when Lila was asleep and the house was quiet, Colton cleared his throat awkwardly. "Elena, can we talk?" "Of course." She set down her mending, her heart suddenly pounding. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about us. About this marriage." He moved to sit beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. "When I asked you to marry me, I said it could be just a partnership, just an arrangement for protection. And I meant that. But I'm starting to want more." The confession came out rough, almost angry, like he was frustrated with himself for feeling it. "I'm starting to care about you in ways that have nothing to do with protection or convenience. And I need to know, is that something you might want too? Or am I alone in this?" Elena's breath caught. She'd been feeling the same pull, the same shift from convenience to something real, but she'd been afraid to acknowledge it, afraid to risk her heart again. "You're not alone," she whispered. Colton's eyes widened. I mean I care about you too. More than I thought I could care about anyone after Thomas." Elena reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I'm scared, Colton. I'm terrified of losing someone again. But I'm more scared of never trying, of living the rest of my life at arm's length from the one person who makes me feel safe." "I'm scared too," he admitted. "I swore after Sarah died that I'd never let myself be vulnerable like that again. But then you showed up, half frozen and stubborn, and somehow you got past every defense I had. So what do? We try." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "We take this slow. We give ourselves permission to be scared. But we try." Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. But they were good tears, hopeful tears. "We try." Colton pulled her close, and this time when he kissed her, it wasn't awkward or perfunctory. It was real and searching and full of promise. Elena melted into him, her hands coming up to frame his face, and for the first time since Thomas died, she let herself feel something other than grief. She felt hope. She felt desire. She felt the possibility of love. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Colton rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly, even though we're already married. I want to learn everything about you. I want to build something real." "Then that's what we'll do." Elena smiled through her tears. "We'll build something real, together." The weeks that followed were a revelation. Colton courted his own wife with a sweetness that made Elena's heart ache. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow. He carved toys for Lila. He taught Elena to ride properly, his hands gentle as he guided her through the basics. They took long walks in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's rhythms and quirks. And slowly, carefully, the separate bedrooms became less separate. Colton would linger in the doorway of Elena's room, talking until late in the night. Elena would wake to find him in the rocking chair with Lila, having come in to check on them and stayed to watch them sleep. The day Elena asked him to stay, to share not just the house, but the room, the bed, the intimacy of true marriage, he'd looked at her with such gratitude and relief that she'd known she was making the right choice. "Are you sure?" he'd asked, his voice shaking. "I'm sure. I'm ready. Are you?" "I've been ready since I found you in that storm." He'd kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Elena had felt the last of her walls crumble. Making love to Colton was nothing like it had been with Thomas. With Thomas, everything had been youthful passion and discovery. With Colton, it was about healing and trust, two wounded people choosing vulnerability despite knowing the cost. Afterward, lying in his arms with Lila sleeping peacefully in her cradle nearby, Elena felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Wholeness. Not because Colton completed her, she'd always been complete on her own, but because he stood beside her, an equal partner in building a life. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. His arms tightened around her. "I love you too. God help me, I love you so much it terrifies me." Good terrified or bad terrified? Good. Definitely good. He kissed the top of her head. "Thank you, Elena, for giving me a reason to live again. Thank you for saving me, for seeing me as more than a curse or a burden. You were never a burden. You were a gift I didn't know I needed." They lay together in the darkness, two survivors who'd found each other against all odds and let themselves believe in the possibility of happiness. Summer arrived in a rush of heat and growth. The garden flourished. The cattle thrived. Lila learned to crawl, then to pull herself up on furniture, her personality emerging more each day, stubborn and sweet and utterly fearless. Elena's belly began to swell with new life, and when she told Colton, he'd wept openly, his hand pressed to the slight curve where their child grew. "I never thought I'd have this again," he'd said. "A family, a future. Thank you. We made this together," Elena had reminded him. "You and me. Neither of us could have done it alone." The quilting circle became a regular part of Elena's week, and through it, she built genuine friendships. The women of the valley saw her not as a curse, but as one of their own, a mother, a wife, a neighbor who would help birth babies and nurse the sick and show up when needed. Morrison left them alone, his influence waning as more people saw him for what he was. Reverend Michaels preached a sermon about forgiveness that most people interpreted as him backing down from his stance against Elena. Life settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable, even joyful. One evening, in late summer, as fireflies blinked in the gathering dusk and Lila chased the ranch cat around the yard, Martha came to visit with surprising news. "The Women's Auxiliary is planning a harvest celebration," she announced, "and we'd like to hold it here, at your ranch. If you're willing." Elena and Colton exchanged glances. "Here? Why?" "Because it's time this valley recognized you as part of the community. Really recognized you, not just tolerated you." Martha's eyes were fierce. "You've earned that recognition, both of you. And besides, you have the best location, flat ground for dancing, plenty of room for tables, that beautiful view of the mountains." "Martha, I don't know," Elena started. "Say yes," Colton interrupted. "She's right. It's time." So they said yes, and suddenly the ranch was buzzing with activity. Women came to help prepare food. Men erected a platform for dancing. Colton and Frank built long tables and benches. The entire valley seemed to converge on the ranch, transforming it from an isolated outpost into the heart of the community. The night of the celebration, Elena stood on the porch watching people arrive. Families with children, elderly couples, young people eager to dance. The same people who'd once whispered about her curse were now eating food she'd helped prepare, laughing in her yard, treating her home as a gathering place. "You did this," Colton said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her expanding waist. "You turned this place from a tomb into a home. You brought life back." "We did this," Elena corrected, leaning back against him. "Together." The celebration lasted until well past midnight. There was music and dancing and so much laughter it felt like the land itself was healing. Even Morrison showed up, stiff and formal, but he stayed on the edge of the crowd and didn't cause trouble. As Elena danced with her husband under a sky full of stars, Lila asleep in Martha's arms nearby, she felt the last piece of her broken heart click back into place. This was what she'd been running toward all along, even when she thought she was just running away. This community, this family, this man who'd chosen her when the world told him not to. "What are you thinking?" Colton asked, spinning her gently. "That I'm home," Elena said. "Finally, truly home." "Yeah," he agreed, pulling her close. "We both are." Winter came again, completing the cycle, but this time Elena faced it without fear. She was no longer alone, no longer desperate, no longer running. She had a husband who loved her, a daughter who was thriving, and a new baby growing inside her who would be born in the spring. The day her son arrived, healthy and squalling, with Colton's gray eyes and her dark hair, Elena held him and wept with joy. Not because the pain was over, but because she'd survived it, because she'd walked through fire and come out stronger. They named him Thomas, after her first husband, and James, after Colton's father, a bridge between past and future, grief and hope. Colton held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. I didn't believe I could have this again. You can, Elena said softly. We can. We're allowed to be happy, Colton. After everything we've survived, we're allowed to build something beautiful. He kissed her then, long and deep, and when he pulled back, his smile was the most beautiful thing Elena had ever seen. I love you, he said. I love all of you, my family, my home, my life. I love you too, Elena whispered. Thank you for not riding past me that day. Thank you for stopping. Thank you for living, for fighting, for choosing me. They sat together in the warm spring sunlight streaming through the bedroom window, their children around them, Lila sleeping in the corner, little Thomas in his mother's arms, and let themselves believe in the miracle of second chances. Outside, the ranch was waking up. Frank was calling orders to Billy in the barn. The cattle were lowing in the distance. Birds sang in the trees that were just beginning to bud. Life was continuing, moving forward, refusing to be stopped by past pain or present fear. And Elena Ward, formerly Elena Moore, formerly a cursed widow with nowhere to go, looked at her husband and her children and her home and knew, with absolute certainty, that she'd found what she'd been searching for. Not perfection, not a life without pain or difficulty, but something better. A life worth living. A family built from broken pieces. A home constructed from ashes and hope and stubborn, defiant love. She'd whispered that they had nowhere left, and he'd said she had him. And he'd been right. She had him. She had her children. She had this ranch, and this valley, and this hard-won place in a community that had finally accepted her. She had everything. And as spring melted, the last of winter's snow, and wildflowers began to bloom along the fence line, Elena closed her eyes and let herself rest in the certainty that she was finally, truly home. The cowboy and the widow. Two broken souls who'd saved each other. Two outcasts who'd built a family from nothing. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. And it was theirs.